Dungeons and Dragons, as well as many other TTRPGs out there, are great for one big reason: the freedom to build. But how do you create a living, breathing world that players will not only enjoy, but also be immersed in? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about maps and the difference between a world that is waiting to be explored and a forgettable one. And one of the first things that your players will want to see is a map, right? This gives them a sense of the world that they are about to explore. When building your map, there's a few key things that you want to keep in mind. First, you want to make sure that it's big enough that players can get lost in it, but not so big that it feels empty. A lot of mistakes that new dungeon masters make is that they'll make a map and then in their minds they'll just see it as rolling green hills and forests for pretty much the entire map. That's just what they picture, and that's because they haven't taken the time to think about what is actually in the world and what the smaller, more intricate locations are going to look like. You also want to fill it with interesting locations, right? Side quests, landmarks, things that are going to make your players want to explore every inch of it. You also want to make sure that each location has a purpose and it's fleshed out enough that players can get a sense of what it would be like to visit there and not just random things thrown around on the map. Many maps feel unfinished or unrealistic, and this is due largely to a lack of planning. I've seen some tips out there about throwing noodles or dice at a graph paper and using these to build the map around as like an outline. Now that's great if you need something quick, but a world that is going to feel real is going to be planned and thorough, and that's what we are talking about today. So you can see here I have my world. At least a small part of it. You can see a map that I have created. I can see where the bays are, the rivers and inlets, that sort of stuff. This is just on a very broad, outside looking in kind of situation. So when I was creating this map, there's a few things that I knew immediately. First of all, I knew that I wanted there to be a location in the center of the map that split the continent in two. This area right here. Now, this is known as the scar in my world, and you know, you can stick around and get to know the channel a little more as we start putting out some of our newer content, and that's all I'm going to tease it with. There's big things coming. I knew that I wanted there to be this great divide between the two continents, the north and the south, and I knew going into this that I also wanted the world to feel real. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this map and we are going to add to it, and you're going to see sort of the thought process of why I choose to put things where they go, right? And we're going to look at everything from mountains and rivers to forests, deserts, and beyond. First things first, I've created this outline. Now let's say you have an outline that you've created. You have a general shape of what your map is going to look like. You like the way it looks, you like its shape, it's unique, it says something to you, right? Just like mine. I wanted the scar here. This one is what I want the map to feel like. So if this is my shape, how do you add to this to make it feel more realistic and more lived in? Well, you need to start with the bigger pieces, and that's going to start with mountains. Now, to really make the map feel real, you need to understand how mountains form. And mountains form due to tectonic plates, right? Here's a little geography lesson. Due to tectonic plates pushing into each other, and when they push into each other, the plates actually crack and bend and push upward. Now this upward motion makes the pieces jut out of the landscape, creating mountains. So when I created this map, I knew that I needed to think about where my mountains are. When I look at my island, I know a few things. I know that there are other land masses in the area that are going to help shape the world that I've built. I know that there's a large island over here. I know there's a small series of islands this way and this way. I know that there is a large island over here. Now you might be thinking, why does any of that matter? Well, earlier I mentioned that a world that feels real is going to have purpose. It's going to have history. Well, that's where some of this comes into shape. You have to think about where these huge tectonic pieces are, right? Where do they cross in your world? How do they break? How do these pieces move, and where are they moving to, right? So you can see here that just by adding these three lines, I have created one tectonic plate up here, one over here, and one over here. Now I can go even further and start really diving into what this looks like, right? How does this world actually move? Now, just by adding these lines, I'm starting to see actual tectonic shapes. Now, this is something that I've thought about. This is why I knew where to put these. Take a moment, think about where your tectonic plates are sitting underneath your world, right? This is going to help build your mountains in a way that is going to look realistic. So I've taken some time and I've put these lines here. I know that there are land masses out here. I've kind of taken a moment and put them there. Now, once you have your tectonic plates and you have an idea of where you kind of want them to be, that sort of thing, you can start thinking about what direction these tectonic plates are moving. Are they moving into each other? Are they moving away from each other? How would the movement of these tectonic plates pull land masses away from each other, right? So, for example, this island that I have out here, this island, in my mind, used to be connected here. Used to be right there. And it's because of the shift of this tectonic plate here that has pulled the island away. Once you start to think about the direction that they're moving and what happens when two tectonic plates actually shove into each other, well, you take some time and you have a series of mountains right where these tectonic plates lined up. Right now, obviously not all of these are perfect. You can see that my lines didn't match up perfectly, but I did have a basic understanding of where my mountains were going to be. And you can see how they were placed with a reason. Now let's take a look at this without any of that stuff. That right there looks like a much more realistic rendition of where a mountain range would be, and you can see where there would be valleys. Right, you can see where sections of country that are separated, and you can start to look at this and think about, okay, well, what would a country that's been separated because of a mountain range, how would that develop versus a country that is open with lots of land? These are the things that you need to think about in order to really get a world that feels real. So once you've laid out your mountains, right, and I'm not going to go into the detail of actually painting the mountains in this one, but you get an understanding of where these things line up, right? And you can go even further. Like, looking at this, I can already tell that I don't 100%. I don't 100% follow it, right? You can see that there are other tectonic pieces that I haven't added. I know that I'm going to want to add a mountain range this way, so maybe I can extend this tectonic plate this way, right? And add another one here. And so if I were to add an island out here, you can see that this is where the mountains would be. You can see how the world starts to take shape simply by putting a little bit of thought into the land masses themselves. Now, with that said, we're going to take this one step further and start thinking about where our rivers and the veins of our world are actually going to form. Now, rivers form because they move down from mountains. They flow downhill, right? Rivers can't go up a mountain, they flow down it. So most rivers are going to form in a mountain, and they're going to flow down either into a lake or into an ocean and end their journey there. So this is where you kind of take the reins and start figuring out where would your rivers form. Now, the great thing about D&D is that because there is magic, there is a lot of ways that you could turn things that... You can take things that don't make sense in this world and simply say, well, it was magic that did it, right? If a river doesn't make sense, that we can suspend our disbelief a little bit because, well, magic exists and there's many other ways that things could have been created. Looking at some of these mountain ranges, you can really start to think, well, where are some of the largest mountains going to be? Well, I know there's going to be mountains near the center, so I can take a river and I can make it flow, right? Give it a look of some sort of a vein structure and make it flow from a large mountain down to the ocean. Now, you can see that in this area, this sort of area here was carved out, if not ripped apart. Now, what reason that is, that's something that you'll have to figure out for yourself, but you can see how if there was a sort of area that was torn apart or ripped apart or what have you, then you can tell, you can start to imagine how a river might form as part of a tear, and how that tear might actually cause a river to form, as opposed to a river flowing to it. And you can really start to get creative with how the river flows, where it ends up, where it empties, where it starts, where it branches. These are, right, this is the fun part of the process, right? Where would they flow, and would they stop anywhere? Because once you start putting rivers in, you can start to really see how outlines of countries would form, right? For example, this right here, this river that I've created here, this area, this is its own country, right? Just like in the modern world, many countries will use rivers as a way to sort of create boundaries between themselves, and they'll use other landmarks as well. But thinking of things like this in terms of sort of a political and larger picture view of things will really help to get your world to start taking shape. Now, beyond rivers, right, you can start adding lakes and things like that, here where the river didn't fully empty, maybe it emptied into a lake or something like that. You get the basic idea, right? You throw in your mountains in a way that feels realistic, has purpose, and then you throw rivers in a way that feels realistic and has purpose, as opposed to just throwing things at a map and saying, I'll figure it out later. So once you've taken the mountains and you've got the rivers, then you start getting even smaller, right? Where would forests form? Well, forests would form where there's water. So there would be forests that form along rivers, along coastlines, areas that would be heavily farmed, would be cleared of forests. So areas around capitals, around large cities, whereas large areas between cities might have more forests. So, for example, here in the center, I know that this is the country of Ilara. And Ilara has a few major cities, but there is one here. I know for a fact that there is one here, and there is one here. So there might be a road or something that, connects the two cities together. So while there might not be a lot of forest around this city and around this city, I know that there would probably be a lot of uncharted territory between them. And that's where you can start sort of thinking about travel between locations, between one city and another. And you start really understanding how the world works. For example, you can see here this mountain range and this valley. This valley might collect a lot of pollen, seeds, various lives, like a whole ecosystem would form in this valley. And so I see that as a great place for a large forest. I know that in my history there is a wall that separates the north of this country here. It separates the north from the rest of the civilized world, if you will. So this wall that stretches here, well, everything north of here is going to be a little more untamed. They have different views, so there's going to be a lot more forest, a lot more wild lands and wild people here. So this forest might be a little bigger, might extend farther up the mountains. But playing around with why a forest is there, why it hasn't been cut down. Is the forest too big to cut down? Are there sacred reasons for it? Are there things in the forest that protect it? These are all things that you want to take into account when building that extra level of life in your world, right? Putting not just rivers and mountains in there, but actual living things. The forest is a living thing. Once you start placing your forests in, then you can start to sort of think about what kinds of forests are they, right? Is this a jungle? Is this a rainforest? Are these evergreen trees, or is this a dark forest? Are there dark things growing there? Are the trees dead? Is this sort of like a fangorn? Something like that. And once you start answering that question, well, you really start to get into the cultural differences, right? If one culture sees a forest in one way and another one sees it a different way, well, there's got to be a reason for that. Why is this forest dangerous to these people, but it's sacred to these other ones, right? And that all goes down to history and reasoning as to why things are the way they are, and that's where you can really start to play around with it. But once you get the forest in, then you want to start placing landmarks. Now, I've already said that I've got this large wall here that separates the northern half, if you will, from the lower half of this northern continent. But there are other things that you can think about as far as landmarks, right? Instead of just cities, you want to think about, well, what about the different temperatures, right? Where does the equator run across this world for me? Now, for me, the equator, luckily, is just a little below the scar here. So that means is that this area and this area, anything here or here, is going to be a lot colder than anything at the center. So what does that mean? Does that mean that the center has to be a desert? Does that mean that the outer reaches have to be cold? No, because again, magic. You can make it your own, right? You can pull the full Rime of the Frost Maiden and make the entire world be in an everlasting winter. And if that's what you want and that's the world you created, well, then guess what? Your party is going to live in an everlasting winter and try to figure out how to save people. But you do have to start thinking about, you know, how does the world actually work? How is it rotating? How quick are the days? Are there areas of this planet that take more heat than, are there areas of this planet that see more sun than other areas? That's where you can start to think about, well, you know, where might there be some deserts? Where would areas of this world be a little drier than normal? Well, I know for a fact that this country here is mostly desert, and this is not due to sun reasons, this is due to other things. So I know that this area is going to be mostly desert, so I can go ahead and start filling that in and really getting an understanding of this. I know that this area around here is also going to be filled in with some desert, so I can start to kind of place markers, and I'm not, this is not how I would do this, right? I would actually go in and shade this, but this is just so you guys get a better understanding of how my thought process works. I know that this area over here has a little more beach-like. That's just something that I wanted. Taking a little bit of inspiration from our own world, I know that the areas here in the south are going to be a little more arid, dry conditions, closer to the South Pole, if you will. So life here is going to be harder to grow, and you're going to get a much more desert area down here. Now, as far as for the north, I know, obviously, these areas are going to be frozen. And I've sort of drawn in my head a sort of line where the, if you really want to get technical, where the tundra and the taiga sort of separate, right? Where it goes from cold forest to absolute wasteland. And I know in my head roughly where that line is, if you will. So you can really start to play with how that works. You know, maybe this area down here is a little cold. If there's land masses out here, they can be colder and colder. But already you can see how this blank map is starting to feel a little more like a complete world. And already I could take this, bring it into my world, and start to really play around with where my players are and have a pretty good sense of where they're going to head, right? I know that if my players start here and head south, they're going to hit desert before they hit the coast. There's a river that they could follow. There's a forest that they could walk through. There's a capital city that they could head to. So just by adding this little bit of detail, the world has already started to come together. What other landmarks could you put in, you know, besides a wall and besides deserts and cold wastelands? Well, that's where you as a dungeon master get to really get creative. For example, this location here in the center, this scar, whatever that is, whatever this little island landmass is, that is a landmark that everybody in this world would probably know. It's probably something that's written in their histories. What other areas of this world would have histories and ruins and points of interest for adventurers, grave robbers, treasure hunters, you know, that sort of stuff? I know in my world that this area down here in the south is a much more untamed and wilder area. There's a lot less that's known about it versus the areas in the north. How you want to take into consideration how the environment affects the world that's being built. Now, I knew that this area was cold. I knew that the north was going to be a frigid place, so I did a little bit of research and I looked into how fjords and glaciers move and that sort of thing. And so what I've done is you can see that I've actually carved away areas where glaciers would have created these fjords. So this area up north is definitely going to have like a more Norwegian feel. It's going to be cold but beautiful. And it's all just part of the thought process. I knew going into this that this area was going to be like that. What things could you put in your lands to make them feel more alive, right? You could add large mountain peaks with great names. You could add volcanoes, right? You could add forgotten towers, or perhaps ruins across your map. When you take a look at a map like this, where it started as this sort of bland open space, and you start adding all of the little details, and you add the deserts and the forests and the rivers and the mountains and the landmarks, you start really seeing a living, breathing world. It starts to kind of take shape on its own. And that's really what you want to do. You want to create the basis of where your world is, and then have your players start to build it with you, right? If they go from here if they go from this city to this city, and somewhere in the middle they stop, they help a town, and they have a house now, well, that house now lives in this world for me, right? And that's, you as a dungeon master get to decide how to do that. But overall, you can see the difference in the world. You can really see how putting a little thought into your map makes the world itself feel a lot bigger, a lot wider, and a lot more realistic and lived in than it would if you had just a blank map and decided to wing it. Once you're finished with these steps and you have a basic understanding of where things are, well, then you can start drawing borders, right? You can start thinking about countries, and you can start thinking about how these countries evolved and where they came from. So for me, I know that this area here is one country, and I know that they have allies, and I know that they have enemies. For example, I know that this area here is an ally of theirs. Now, the country of Alara, you can see their borders are created by the coastline, the mountain range here, the wall in the north, and of course the river. So you can see how these natural landmarks have really created the country's sort of set boundaries. And if they wanted to go any further outside of these boundaries, right, if this country wanted to sort of step into this area and take some of this land, or this area and take some of this land, that's where you as a dungeon master can really start to think about how these sort of these chess games between countries can start to affect the political environment. What would it mean if this country stepped into this country and started to sort of try to take land away from them and add to their own? That could mean war. That could mean a lot of things, right? Creating borders and an understanding of how the various countries see each other is just another step, right? I know there's a country here and a country here, and they don't see eye to eye with this country here. And that breakdown of where things are, where are the various cultures in this world and the various peoples, that is what's going to make it feel more real. Where would humans go? What has the history of this world caused? What is this scar down here? How did this scar affect the people? What happened to the people that were south of the scar versus the people north of the scar? How did the cultures evolve up here? How do they see the scar? Is it a sacred place, or is it a piece of history that they'd rather forget? These ideas of how cultures evolve based on their landmarks, their boundaries, their surroundings, the people, their history, all of that is going to shape people differently. And there you have it. This map went from being something blank to something with actual purpose and control and history, right? You can see where the deserts are, the forests, the mountains, the rivers, all of that, as well as some landmarks, the wall. You can see the borders of countries and how they form. And just by taking these few steps, putting a little thought process, now I can take this map, start to flesh it out, start to create something that feels more real, starts to feel more lived in. And these steps here are what is going to take your world and make it that more believable, that more walkable, and make it much easier for your party to adventure through and immerse themselves in, because now you have a deeper understanding of your world that you didn't before. Whereas when it was like this, well, I'll throw in a mountain over here or a forest over there, and I'll just add them as we go. Versus, no, I know exactly where my mountains are, I know where my forests and my rivers are, I know where my players are going, and some of the basic landscapes of what they'll encounter, as well as maybe some of the borders of countries that they might cross over into. Once you have this understanding, then you can really delve into, well, what did this country's history look like? How did these borders change over time? Did the country grow or shrink? What is their economy like? What are the people like? What do they believe in? What is the diversity? Is it all humans? Are there other races? That is going to really start to take shape. And when you start to look at countries differently, if one country is more tolerant of non-humans versus another, then you start to see how the political climate can start to change in the world. And now you have a living, breathing world. Now, this is just one of the many things that you could do to make your world feel more real. I hope that this video helps you understand a little more of my thought process and how I went into building my world and creating a world that that I feel that my players could really have a fun time walking through and adventuring through and knowing a little bit of the history of the world. And there you have it. Now, obviously, this is a very quick rundown. Already the video is longer than I intended it to be, but hey, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it helps you understand how I do my world building and what my thought process is behind the world building. Obviously, this is just one way to make a map. This is not how everybody needs to make their map. This is just how I do it. And I just wanted to share a little bit of my process in the hopes that it might help somebody out there who's looking to do something similar. If you have your own tips and tricks for creating maps, please, please, please leave it in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Feed your displacer beasts, and we'll see you next time, adventurers.